A few months ago, my wife and I moved into an old house on the outskirts of town. We didn't do it for the charm of old houses or because we were adventurers who wanted to discover the occult. It was because we had no money, and that house was much cheaper, enough for us to pay for it with all our savings. The first nights were complicated. I'm not going to lie to you, it was a problem to adapt. I heard noises all over the house, creaks and movements that I felt I shouldn't hear, but hey, it was an old house. Maybe the children's footsteps echoed in the house and generated that. Other than that, everything seemed perfect, until I was alone for a weekend. My wife decided to take our kids to visit her parents, since I don't get along with my in-laws. I was going to spend the weekend at the house. I didn't mind being left alone. In fact, I was looking forward to having some quiet time to rest and enjoy the house without the hustle and bustle of the kids. The first night was normal, although I was already beginning to feel a strange discomfort. The absolute silence of the house made me notice things I had ignored before. Noises I thought were caused by the children. Those noises were still there. Was it an old pipe? On the second day, the noises became more persistent. The little banging and creaking noises that seemed to come from different parts of the house became more. I went through every room. I checked the windows, doors, and walls. I found nothing out of the ordinary, but the fear of finding a nest of rodents was growing. That night, the noises intensified. Around midnight, I distinctly heard footsteps in the hallway. Those were not rats. I got out of bed and walked to the door, my heart pounding. I pushed open the door, hoping to find some explanation, but the hallway was empty. I turned on all the lights and checked every corner, but I found nothing. I went back to bed, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. I lay down and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Finally, exhaustion got the better of me, and I managed to sleep. I was sure that there was no one inside the house, although what I heard had no real explanation. When I opened my eyes a few hours later, I woke up suddenly, feeling a pressure in my chest. I couldn't move. My body was completely paralyzed. I started to look at everything from the bed, and at that moment, I saw it. A figure was coming out of the closet. She was tall and thin, her face an undefined shadow. She was walking slowly towards me. Her steps were slow and heavy. My mind screamed. I wanted to get up, but my body did not respond. Every step that thing took toward me made the terror invade me more. I could feel its gaze fixed on me, as if it was waiting for something, but my fear was so intense that I couldn't think clearly. I tried to move with all my might, but it was useless. I was trapped in my own bed, unable to do anything as the thing approached. Suddenly, the figure stopped at the foot of the bed and leaned toward me. I felt its breath on my face. Its mouth was moving, but it made no sound. He seemed to want to say something, but I didn't care. I just wanted him to go away, to disappear from my sight. At that moment, everything went black, and I woke up suddenly, sweating and panting. It had been the worst sleep paralysis of my life. After that night, things only got worse. This may sound illogical and insane, but the figure in the closet was not a hallucination. I knew. I tried to keep busy during the day, but the house seemed to have a life of its own. The noises continued, louder and clearer. I began to notice that they always came from the same place, the bedroom closet. I thought about leaving, running away as soon as possible and never returning to that place again. But where would we go? My children could not stay at their grandparents' house just because I had sleep paralysis and heard strange noises. The next day, my wife and children would arrive, and I had to do something. During one afternoon, in a fit of desperation, I tried to move the closet to see what was behind it. The furniture was incredibly heavy, as if something was anchoring it to the floor. I managed to move it a few inches, and the smell it emanated was nauseating. It was a rotting smell, something that shouldn't be there. Suddenly, I heard a noise come from behind the cabinet. Someone was banging violently from the wall. Terrified, I put the closet back in its place and ran out of the room. That night, the noises were deafening. Those noises filled the house. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't go on living like this. I grabbed a flashlight and a metal rod and headed for the bedroom. I moved the closet with all my might, exposing the wall behind it. There were marks on the wall as if someone had scratched desperately to get out. The smell was unbearable. I started hitting the wall with the metal bar, creating a hole in the plaster. What I found behind it was worse than I had imagined. A corpse, dry and rotting, was sandwiched there. I stepped back, horrified. I could not believe my eyes. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, but human features were discernible. Not only was the corpse human, but it also looked familiar. His body was the same as the being I had seen in my sleep paralysis. I called the police, my hand trembling as I dialed the number. My voice barely came out as I explained what I had found. The police were slow to arrive, which made me realize how far away we were. The officers came in and examined the place. They asked me questions, many of which I couldn't answer. I didn't know who this person was or how he had gotten there. I could only think of the nights of terror and the figure I had seen. When I later found out a little about the history of this house, I discovered much more than I wanted to know. It had previously belonged to a man who mysteriously disappeared years ago. No one knew what happened to him, and the house was sold several times, with each new owner fleeing soon after moving in. Part of me thought that after discovering the body, whatever happened that night would stop happening. But to tell the truth, I didn't want to take the risk. We decided to move. I couldn't live in that house anymore. My wife understood, although I never told her all the details. I only said that there were dead bodies in the house, that it was rotten to the core. We found a new place, smaller but cozy, where I could start to forget what happened. Sometimes I close my eyes and see the figure coming out of the closet, walking towards me with that expression of anguish. I know it was real, that what I experienced was not just a series of nightmares. The police never found a clear explanation, and the case remained open. How did that man die? How did he get behind the wall? Maybe he was just a victim of that house, and if we had stayed there, our fate would have been the same.
Hey, I'm Rhonda. My parents always said our little town was the safest place in the world. We lived in an old but cozy house, surrounded by woods and quiet. It was a place where everyone knew each other, where doors were left unlocked and children played in the streets until late. The townspeople were exceedingly kind to me. I grew up in the homes of my neighbors, my friends, my parents' friends. Nothing bad had ever happened here. Or so I thought. I was 14 years old, and that night my parents had a work engagement. Something important, or so they said. But it wasn't the first time they had left me alone. But this time, something felt different. They assured me they would be back before midnight, and that I would be fine. They were confident that our community was safe. So was I, until that night. I stayed up watching movies, losing track of time. The house was silent. Only the murmur of the television filled the space. Everything was normal until I heard a noise outside. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But the sound became clearer. It was as if someone was walking through the garden. I turned off the TV and walked over to the window. My heart was pounding, and a strange feeling of fear came over me. Then, I saw them. Dark figures, dressed in robes, surrounded the house. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew they were watching me. Terror paralyzed me for a moment, but then I reacted. I had to hide. I moved quickly, turning off all the lights and making sure the doors were locked. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have time to think about it. The house that had been my refuge became a trap. I could hear their footsteps approaching, the whispers. They knew I was alone. I hid in the closet of my parents' room. I could hear my own breathing, rapid and ragged. I tried to calm down, but the fear was too much. The footsteps came closer and closer until I heard them just outside the bedroom door. They stopped. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought they might hear it. The door slowly opened, and the footsteps entered the room. I could see their shadows through the cracks in the closet. They were searching. They were whispering in a language I didn't understand, but I knew they were talking about me. I closed my eyes and prayed they wouldn't find me. Time stretched. Every second was an eternity. Suddenly, the footsteps moved away and the door to the room closed. I waited a little longer, making sure they were gone. When silence reigned again, I stepped out of the closet. I knew I couldn't stay in there. They must be all over the house. I had to find a way out. I left my parents' room and headed for the stairs. I tried not to make a sound, but every step seemed like a clatter in the silence. As I made my way downstairs, I heard noises in the kitchen. Someone was moving things around, searching. I knew I couldn't get out the front door, so I headed for the living room window. Just as I was about to open it, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I screamed, but another hand covered my mouth. I turned and saw a robed figure. His face was hidden by the hood, but his eyes, cold and dark, stared at me. I scrambled and managed to wriggle free easily. That figure wasn't applying pressure on me, just subtly grabbing me, as if I were friendly. My only reaction was to keep running into the hallway. I hid behind the couch, trying to control my breathing. I could hear them searching the house. Fear consumed me, but I had to stay strong. Then I heard something that made me freeze. The front door opened, and I heard my parents' voices. They were back. I had to warn them that there were people in the house, and they were in danger too. I came out of my hiding place and ran towards them, but I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw them. They were with them, with those in the robes. My parents had a strange expression, almost absent. Something was not right. I tried to shout at them to tell them to run away, but the words stuck in my throat. My parents approached me. Something was wrong. They were not acting like themselves. My mother, in a soft but firm voice, told me that I couldn't escape, that I had been prepared all my life for this. I didn't understand anything. Terror and confusion overwhelmed me. I tried to run, but my father grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, almost painful. They led me toward the basement, telling me it was for my own good, that I should die a nonviolent death as part of the ritual. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A ritual? What the hell was going on?
Honey, we need you to stay here and behave yourself. Do you understand?
At first, you will be afraid, you will be hungry, you will be thirsty, but that's normal. You will never eat again. It will be your thanks to us for saving you. Saving? What are you talking about? What's going on? Yes, we saved you from a normal, boring life. We got you very little from the hospital. You were the little project of the whole community, and now we're going to reap the rewards. Was I listening right? These people were not my parents? These people who raised me for 14 years did it only to let me starve to death in the basement? Desperation gave me strength. I tackled the woman I used to think was my mother and ran as fast as I could to the second floor. Without a second thought, I threw myself through the glass, feeling the sharp pain of the glass cutting into my skin. I fell to the ground, hitting hard, but the adrenaline rush made me get up quickly. My parents and the hooded men were subtly calling out to me. They were laughing. They told me that if I didn't starve to death, I would die in the forest. I heard them approaching, but only to see what I was doing, with no interest in catching me. I ran into the forest. They said I would die there, but it was the only hope of escape. The pain in my wounds was almost unbearable, but fear was a stronger motivator. I had to keep running. The forest was dense and dark. I could hear footsteps and voices behind me. I didn't know how long I could go on like this. I was injured, bleeding, and exhausted, but I couldn't stop. The fear of what they would do to me if they caught me kept me going. I stumbled several times. The forest floor was treacherous. With each step, I felt my strength leaving me. I began to feel that I could not make it and that they would soon catch up with me. But then, in the distance, I saw lights. It was the road. A new hope was born in my chest, and with my last remaining strength, I ran towards the light. I reached the road, panting and almost collapsing from pain and exhaustion. I saw a truck approaching, and I threw myself into the middle of the road, throwing my arms up in the air. The truck came to a screeching halt, and the driver ran towards me. He was an older man, with an expression of concern and alarm on his face. I couldn't speak, just cried and pointed toward the forest. The truck driver helped me into the vehicle and quickly pulled away. The truck driver took me to the nearest hospital. My injuries were treated, and the police arrived quickly to take my statement. I told them everything, but it was hard to believe. A whole town was involved in a ritual, and my own parents tried to kill me. I thought no one would believe me, and I was right. They did not. The police were about to take me back to town, but I ran and escaped from them as fast as I could. I ran and ran, watching police patrols looking for me for a few minutes. After a while, they stopped. I kept walking down the road, alone and scared, afraid that my supposed parents would show up. Instead, I saw the truck from before. I asked the truck driver if he believed my story, and he told me that he thought it was pretty hard to believe, but he didn't usually go through that town for a reason. He saw several rituals in these areas, hooded people, fire in places that shouldn't be any. It didn't really surprise him that something like this could happen. After all, he didn't believe in the supernatural, but this was totally human. The truck driver, the man who had saved me, offered me to stay with his family. I had nowhere else to go. I accepted, grateful, but still terrified. Years have passed since that night. I never returned to my village and never saw my parents again. The truck driver's family took me in as one of their own, and little by little I found some peace with my new family and my 7 new brothers and sisters. But the scars, both physical and emotional, remain. I wrote my story and published it. Some believed me, some didn't, but I didn't care. What mattered was that the truth was out there. The police never investigated, and I knew they would not. Someday I might go to that town, but I won't until I know that I'm over what I went through that night. Until I know that if I go, even with people, I have to be prepared not to leave.
When you were kids, what did you think when you were all alone? All parents are very careful not to leave their children alone, but at some point, they have to. What was your first time? Were you afraid? Were you relieved and happy? Did something bad happen to you? To be honest, my first time being alone was the worst. Being very young, maybe even too young to be alone for the first time, I had a horrifying experience that no child or adult should ever have in their life. An experience which I miraculously got out of alive, because at a very young age, I knew human madness at its maximum expression. It all started when I was 11 years old. I'll be honest, I'm not a parent, and I'm not sure if that's the right age to leave a child alone. I just know that in my particular case, I was too young, and I didn't feel safe. Since I always behaved well, my parents had no problem leaving for an hour during the night to pick up my brother for a birthday party. At that point, they decided that this was the perfect opportunity for me to experience a short time of being alone, so they could see if I got into any mischief. I wanted to go with them in the car, see my brother, and fall asleep on the ride back. But I guess my parents thought it was the best thing for me, or at least that's what they told me as a kid. Once they left in the car, I turned on the TV and found an animated movie. I was very entertained and distracted, waiting for the night to pass quickly and for my parents and sibling to arrive, when suddenly I heard a loud knock on the door.
Hey, it's me, Mom. Open the door.
I didn't know who that lady was, but I knew one thing for sure. That wasn't my mom. I had no idea who she was, but she was scaring me very much. The banging and screaming of that lady was getting more and more violent. She wanted to get into the house at all costs, screaming desperately for me to open the door for my mother. She said that she was my mother and she was going to take care of me, that if I didn't open the door, she was going to be very angry with me and she'd have to punish me. For a moment, I thought about opening the door, just out of fear that she would come in anyway. But I remembered what my parents had told me. I should never open the door for any stranger, no matter what they tell me. Opening the door only makes things worse. At that instant, the noises at the door stopped and I calmed down, thinking it was all over. I ran to the dining room window and opened it just to see if the terrifying woman was gone. Maybe with a little luck, I could see her leaving and then tell my parents. The lady was in front of the window. She'd already seen me. She was staring at me with a huge, twisted smile, trembling with anticipation and nerves.
Hey, kid. Why don't you open it for me? Don't you recognize me? Hi, Mom.
Scared, I ran as fast as I could to my room to hide. I turned off the light and got under my sheets, but soon I realized that this was a lousy hiding place. So I got out of my sheets and went under my bed. Come to think of it, that hiding place wasn't much better. But can you blame me? I was an 11-year-old boy being harassed by a woman who was trying to break into my house. I stayed under the bed, crying quietly, when I heard a crash at the window. From my room, I could see everything that was going on. The glass had suddenly exploded and a brick had entered our house. Behind the brick, the woman came in, walking slowly with a huge smile on her face.
Mommy's home. Where are you, little boy? Are you hiding so you won't eat your vegetables?
The woman began to look everywhere, slowly scanning the house for me. I feel that I could have escaped several times, but I didn't dare to do so. With the excuse of looking for the best time to escape through the window, I missed several opportunities where I could have ran. I was terrified. I didn't know if I could have run, even if I had the perfect opportunity. After a few minutes, it was finally time to search my room.
I feel the naughty boy is here. Come out, come out. I promise not to do anything to you. Come out, little brat. Come out now, or I swear I'll break your legs. Do you want to make your mom look ridiculous in front of all these people? Do you think this is a game? If I find you, I swear I'll kill you. Oh, are you under the bed? You better not be here, you little scumbag. I'll fill you full of holes. Why? Why are all my children abandoning me? I just want to be a good mother. I found you!
As soon as she found me, the woman grabbed my feet and dragged me from under the bed. With a big smile, she grabbed both of my arms and started shaking me back and forth as if trying to relax a baby, but in a total careless and painful way. From 1 second to the next, she froze. Her face had changed. Now she was looking at me with hatred and resentment.
Why did you hide from me? Is it because you don't want to take a bath?
Furious, the woman grabbed my arm while I was crying and took me to the bathroom. Without letting go of me, she turned on the faucet to the sink, and we washed our hands, and after covering it, she plunged my face into the little water that had filled up, trying to drown me.
Waste! You are trash! I didn't raise you to be a filthy insect. You're just like your father, a useless, filthy scum! You horrible, filthy little brat!
Luckily, there was too little water to drown me, and in an oversight of the woman, I bit her hand and ran away as fast as I could. I ran around the house looking for the door, but it was locked. I turned around and the woman was standing there staring at me, this time with a knife in her hands.
Hey, I'll forgive you for what you did to me. I just want to be with you. Come.
Crying, I ran desperately to the window as the woman chased me. Surprisingly, she was much slower than I was, as if she had trouble walking. I ran to my neighbor's house crying while the woman screamed at me from the house.
No! Come back! Why are you leaving me? I did everything I could. I'm sorry.
I tried to tell the neighbors everything, but there was no need. They were already listening to the woman, screaming in desperation and panic. Shortly after my parents arrived with my brother, they were surprised to see the police at my house. As soon as they saw me, they hugged me, crying, asking me to forgive them for leaving me alone. Once the police entered my house, they found the strange woman sitting on the floor of my room, hugging a teddy bear. She said it was her son, and that they were not going to take him away from her. As she said this, she was stabbing the bear with a huge knife all over its body. The woman was immediately taken to a mental institution. When I grew up, my parents told me that, like me, this woman was also a victim. She had lost a pregnancy due to an act of violence by her partner, and she was never able to come to her senses. It just got worse and worse and worse over time. Her family tried to take care of her without taking her to a mental health center, but it was too much for them, and a few days before, she'd slipped away. Today, I feel empathy for the woman. She didn't really have any bad intentions towards me, but she was totally out of her mind. To tell you the truth, it took me years to encourage myself to be alone. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about that woman. I remember it like it was yesterday. In those moments, I just smile and am glad to be alive.
What were you afraid of when you were kids? My fears were not unlike those of any ordinary child. Dark monsters, ghosts, and all things we don't understand and think will hurt us. I have to say that these fears were taken away from me at an early age to be replaced by something much more sinister. That day that changed my fear, I was visited by the most tetric, cruel, and real being that can exist. The human being. I will tell you about that night. I was only 12 years old, too young to be able to defend myself, but too old to need a babysitter. I was going to be alone for a short time since my parents had gone to buy a few things from the supermarket. I was in my room playing with my toys on the floor. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from the living room. I stood up annoyed. I honestly thought it was my parents. Surely they had forgotten something. I was grounded that day, so I wasn't supposed to play with my toys, and now I was sure to be discovered. I started to put away all my toys as fast as I could, hoping to hide everything in time. But if they had come back to check that I hadn't done anything, they would surely discover me. Time went by and my parents didn't come into my room, which seemed very strange to me. They always came into my room as soon as they arrived, since they had recently decided that I no longer needed a babysitter. But they were still a little paranoid. As time went by, I kept hearing footsteps, and at that moment, I realized one thing. It was only one person walking. I quickly looked out my bedroom window and noticed something that gave me goosebumps. My parents' car was gone. My parents hadn't come home yet. I looked through the half-open door of my room and saw a dark figure moving. That person wasn't either of my parents. It was something else. I stood still, trying to understand what I was seeing. The figure was moving slowly through the living room. He was not wearing a mask or anything to hide his face. It was a man, tall and thin, with a smile that chilled my blood. I didn't know this man. I knew he was probably a thief, but something about him made me even more uneasy. At that time, I was too young to understand what bothered me so much about that person. But now I understand. What I was too young to notice at the time was the man's behavior. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't in a hurry, and he definitely wasn't afraid. He was having fun. To make it even worse, at that time, I also didn't realize that the man wasn't really stealing anything. He wasn't inspecting the drawers, he didn't have a bag or a backpack, and he didn't intend to run away as soon as he saw someone. The man was not looking for something. He was looking for someone. As I told you, at that moment, I was too young to make the right decisions in the face of something like that. I was paralyzed. My hands were sweating, and I felt a strong stitch in my chest that did not let me breathe. At that moment, I should have hidden, ran, screamed for help, Whatever I could have done was better than what I did. Faced with that strange figure wandering around my house, I just stood there, staring at him as if I was totally exposed. The man saw me, and his smile widened. I ran back to my room, closed the door, and hid under my bed. I heard his footsteps approaching, slow but sure. The door to my room opened slowly. I tried to hold my breath, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. Once the man entered my room, I became much more nervous and almost gave a little scream. I was surprised that the man had entered my room as if my unlocked door had put up any kind of impediment for him to do so. Once he entered the room, I could watch from under my bed as the door slowly closed. He didn't need to close it that slowly, but he was doing so that I heard the door creak and became even more desperate. A few seconds after the door closed, the light went out as well. The light was still coming through my bedroom window, so he went over to close it. We were both in absolute darkness. I could no longer see anything, and I was sure he couldn't either, which I considered an advantage. Now that I am an adult, I realized that this was part of his game. He enjoyed both of us not seeing anything. He had the situation under control, because even if I escaped through the door, he would hear me do it and jump at me before I got away. In the best case scenario, I could run a few meters down the hallway and he would catch me there. This really was a no-win situation. From one second to the next, I felt a weight on top of my bed. At first, I thought the man had laid down, but I quickly realized that the weight was concentrated on just one part of the bed. The man was standing on top of it. My panic at that moment was overshadowed by my difficulty breathing. The bed was somewhat old, and when he climbed on top, I was crushed to the floor. I couldn't resist my urge to cry, so I cried softly. I thought he didn't hear me, but today I realized that with the silence, it was impossible not to. He knew perfectly well where I was. Suddenly, the bed became lighter and I could breathe. I was relieved. I began to breathe deeper and relax. Almost for a second, I forgot about the psychopath in my room. But that relief didn't last long. At that instant, laughter was sounding from under the bed with me. The man was lying on the floor next to me. I froze, and without holding back, I began to cry. Next to me, the man pretended to be crying, mocking me. I couldn't see him as I had my back to him, but I felt his warmth next to me. Then I began to feel something walking around my waist. It was one of my toy soldiers. The soldier was poking me with his plastic gun. Even though it wasn't sharp, the pressure caused me pain. It started to hurt more and more and more as I cried nonstop, and the psycho's laughter rang out throughout the room, until suddenly there came a thread of hope. I heard my parents' car pulling up to the house. I used that moment to react, and I shot out from under the bed, escaping my room. I ran, crying desperate without looking back. The man could have caught me if he wanted to, but I never heard his footsteps behind me. He never tried to catch me.
Mom! Dad, help me!
What happened, darling?
Did you get hurt? Are you okay?
A man! There's a horrible and big man in the house! He's in my bedroom!
They quickly went to my room, but there was no one there. Just a dark room and an open window. Over the next few days, my parents checked the cameras more frequently, and to their terror, we were able to experience at least for a few seconds what I experienced. A few days after the incident, the man approached the camera, staring at it and smiling, as if provoking them, as if to say that whenever he wants, he can come back and take me away. We moved a few months later. My parents couldn't bear the thought of the man coming back one day. Do you know what helped them make the final decision? A few days after it all happened, a note appeared under my window. The note was addressed to me and said that if my parents hadn't come home that day, he would still be playing with me. All my life, I have never been one to believe in ghosts. I was a man of science and always believed that there was a coherent explanation for everything. But there was a time in my life when I started to doubt those beliefs as something really strange started to happen in my apartment. I first noticed it after I had gone grocery shopping. I'd bought enough food and snacks to stock the fridge and little pantry that I had in my apartment. I remember eating well that night and saving some leftovers for the next day. I went to bed, and after some time, when I woke up the next morning, I decided to warm up last night's leftovers for breakfast. But when I opened my fridge, I couldn't find them. Shocked, I wondered what could have happened to the leftovers that I left the night before. At first, I thought I had kept them somewhere else and forgotten about it, so I looked around a little bit more in the fridge. But no matter how much I looked, they had completely disappeared. As I kept searching through my fridge, I realized something that was very odd. The leftovers weren't the only thing that were missing, as a substantial amount of other food items were gone too. I was completely baffled now, so I looked into my little pantry to see if any food items there were missing too, and as I opened it, I realized that my pantry had also been ransacked. My mind was struggling to come up with a substantial explanation as to why my food was disappearing, and my first feasible thought was that it had to be rats. I quickly realized how stupid that was, as even I knew that rats weren't capable of opening fridges and pantries, and even if they could, there would obviously be traces of crumbs or something. The strange phenomenon left me speechless for a while as I kept racking my brain. I knew I was home alone all through yesterday, so no one else could have taken the food items. It took me a while, but I eventually snapped out of it and went on with my day. I remember telling one of my friends about it, and he made a joke saying, "Maybe it's a starving poltergeist. I mean, I've always told you that ghosts were real, and maybe this one is a chubby ghost who just wants to steal your food." I didn't laugh at this joke, so he continued with, "Chill out, dude. Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks on you, or maybe you're just becoming forgetful, but you'll find those missing food items, trust me." My friend's words put my mind at ease, and I eventually decided to shrug it off and forget about the whole thing. When I got home that night, I saw my girlfriend was waiting for me in my apartment. She was sitting on the couch watching a movie, and that's when I remembered that I had given her a key. I immediately wanted to ask if she was the one taking my food, but I stopped myself. We hadn't been going out long, but I didn't think she was a thief, so I decided to let it slide. We both slept at my apartment that night, and the next morning when I opened the fridge, the food was significantly smaller than what I had left there last night. I decided to ignore this, as I told myself that it couldn't have been her. I was completely sure that she was with me all through the night, so there was no way it could have been her. But as the week passed by, more and more food items were going missing, and it reached a point where I couldn't take it anymore, so I confronted my girlfriend. I remember telling her, "I know this is a weird question, but I need you to tell me the truth. Are you the person who's been taking my food from my apartment?" Shocked, she looked at me and said, "What the heck are you talking about? What do you mean taking food from your apartment?" I then looked her dead in the eyes as I said, "Well, for the past week now, a lot of food items have been going missing from my fridge, and I'm 100% sure that I'm not the one taking it. Plus, you're the only person who has a key to my apartment, in addition to free access to my fridge." I could tell she was angry now as she looked at me and said, "What's that supposed to mean? Are you accusing me of stealing food from you? Because if you are, you've completely lost your mind. I don't need you to feed me." Things just escalated from there, and it didn't take long before we got into a very heated argument. I eventually left the apartment before things got any worse, as I wanted to clear my head. I walked around for a while before getting an incredible idea. On my way back home, I stopped at a store and bought a little security camera. When I got back home, I set the camera in a position that directly pointed at the fridge and my pantry. While my girlfriend had vehemently denied ever stealing from me, I didn't fully believe her, as I knew not to blindly trust the words that came out of her mouth. I convinced myself that she had been sneaking into my apartment when I was home alone to take the food items, so I decided to personally catch her red-handed by using the camera to film her and get her stealing from me on tape. There was no way she was going to be able to deny it if I showed her the irrefutable footage, so I made sure she didn't see me setting up the camera. After a while, I eventually started feeling sleepy, but I was a bit thirsty too, so I decided to get a cup of water from the fridge. When I was done, I went to bed, and I finally felt myself dozing off. I didn't know when I finally slept off, but when I woke up the next morning, the first thing I did was to check my fridge. Surely enough, numerous items had gone missing, so I rushed to check the camera's footage. I had a smile on my face as I couldn't wait to confront my girlfriend with the hard proof that I had acquired. But as I kept watching the footage, my confidence turned into terror as I saw an unknown woman climbing out of the small storage space in my ceiling. I tried, but I couldn't make out her face as her hair covered most of it. Horrified, I watched as she started to roam my fridge and pantry. As the footage kept playing, I felt a crippling fear fill each and every inch of my body as I watched how she ran to hide when I came out for a glass of water. Numerous horrific scenarios played out in my head as I realized that this woman could have killed me last night. The video was now nearing its end as I watched the woman go back into the small storage space that she crawled out of. This meant that she was probably still in my apartment. When the footage was finally done, it took a lot of strength, but I tried to keep myself from screaming. I knew I couldn't apprehend the strange woman on my own, so I calmly called the cops. When the cops arrived, I quickly showed them the footage, and the woman was immediately taken out of the storage space and arrested. The cops believed that she had been living there for a while now, and they told me I was lucky to have found her, as it was only a matter of time before the strange woman did something really morbid. I was scared shitless after that incident, and I remember asking my friend if I could stay at his place for a couple of days, as I didn't want to stay in my apartment for some time. It's been a while since this happened, and numerous security measures have been put in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. I still check the storage space from time to time, as the paranoia really gets to me sometimes. I also started to live by a very famous quote, as nowadays, I pretty much sleep with one eye open.